Is Iran daring the US to stop its nuclear program? Recently, Tehran doubled down on its defiance against Washington by expanding its uranium enrichment program. The International Atomic Energy Agency recently visited 2 sites in Iran, and this is what they found.
Analysis of the samples has revealed that Iran's stockpile of the low-enriched uranium now stands at about 2,105 kilograms.
Iran is deliberately exceeding limits set in the landmark 2015 nuclear deal with world powers. But Tehran says it is free to do so because of what Trump did.
President Trump is taking the United States out of the Iran nuclear deal.
The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made.
2 years on, the Gulf has been plagued by a cycle of crisis and calm. A cat-and-mouse game where sanctions are followed by proxy attacks. Iran first raised the stakes by saying it will no longer observe the agreed uranium stockpile limit.
ظرفیت تولید محصول غنیسازی کشور بدون اضافه نمودن زنجیره و یا سانتریفیوژ با برخی تغییرات فنی به حدود 4 برابر افزایش.
The US responded with a devastating round of sanctions, sending Iran's currency into freefall. In June of 2019, 4 oil tankers are attacked in the Gulf, near the world's energy choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. The US immediately blamed Iran. 2 similar attacks are carried out a month later. Iran then downs a US unmanned drone in the Gulf. Trump claims he was just minutes away from launching a strike on Iran before pulling back. Instead, he imposed more sanctions to an already faltering Iranian economy.
In a few moments, I'll be signing an executive order imposing hard-hitting sanctions on the Supreme Leader of Iran and the Office of the Supreme Leader of Iran and many others.
In September of 2019, 2 major Saudi oil facilities are hit in a mysterious drone attack, shutting down 50% of the country's oil production and 5% of the world's oil supply. And even though Yemeni rebels claimed responsibility, the US and Saudi Arabia blamed Iran. So what happened next? Yep, you've guessed it, more sanctions.
We have just sanctioned the Iranian National Bank. That is their central banking system, and it's going to be at the highest level of sanctions.
After months of sanctions and empty threats, many wondered whether Trump had the stomach to respond to Iran militarily. Then this happened.
Breaking news. In a major escalation in tensions between the U.S. and Iran, the top Iranian general has been killed in an airstrike while leaving the Baghdad airport. The Pentagon confirmed the U.S. military carried out the attack. Qasem Soleimani was one of the most powerful figures in the Middle East.
Soleimani was the head of the Quds Force, which oversees all of Iran's foreign military operations. Many considered him the second most important figure in Iran after the supreme leader. Washington says he was responsible for attacks on U.S. military personnel in the region. Millions came out for his funeral.
But Iran's hardline elite is badly rattled by the assassination. Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, wept as he prayed for his right-hand man.
Iran's supreme leader vowed to avenge the assassination of Soleimani, and this is how they retaliated.
Iranian TV says this video shows ballistic missiles being fired at U.S. troop locations in Iraq last night. More than a dozen missiles were aimed at the Al-Assad base in western Iraq and a base in Erbil, 2 of the sites where American troops are located.
The U.S. said it didn't suffer any casualties from the attacks. Iran said it was just the beginning of its sworn vengeance. But then both sides toned down their saber rattling after this.
People in Iran are panicking.
And Iran's supreme leader has put the country on a war footing.
Iran's government is now admitting the outbreak is much worse than previously thought.
We're becoming crushed under a tidal wave of unfathomable numbers.
To overtake Italy as the world's worst-hit nation.
A scene reminiscent of 9/11.
More than 80 million Americans now told to stay at home.
Iran desperately sought outside help after being hit hard by the coronavirus. But the US only intensified its sanctions. Later, the US itself would become the most affected country by COVID-19. Iran could do nothing else but
will withstand and resist. The United States will resist the sanctions and will resist external pressures.
Now, all of this brings us back to Iran ramping up its uranium enrichment program. Despite several rounds of sanctions, Iran continues to defy the US. But it's doing so while keeping the doors wide open to UN inspectors. Maybe the coronavirus brought a much-needed pause. But now, as Trump campaigns for re-election, is Iran deliberately trying to provoke the US to see what it can get away with? And if so, will Trump jump the gun, bringing both countries to the brink of war?